So we're changing gears a bit here. So we're now moving forward to the concept presentations. As you know, at this time of year, we do look at the proposed concepts for upcoming initiatives. And this is a part of a fairly long process. Most of you know it, but not all of you know all of it. And so each year, the council is asked to review and comment on concepts that might be considered to go forward into future initiatives. And basically, the development of each one of these before it comes to you is a fairly complicated and deliberative process. So it starts with the staff who gather information from scientific meetings, the literature, the progress reports of what's going on in their portfolios, et cetera. And then they begin to develop the ideas, which are then presented at a science planning meeting. And this includes all of the staff and council members. And this year, Rita Pickler was a very active participant. George Demaris was scheduled to be, and he had a conflict at the last minute. But we generally have at least 2 council members so that we have input and continuity to bring back to this entire group. And then these concepts are shaped and reshaped a bit based on what suggestions were already made at the science planning meeting, posters and discussions. And then they come to you for you to look at, to evaluate what you think in a sort of a global way. What do you think the prospects are? Is the community ready? What direction should it be tweaked in, et cetera? And then each council member is asked to review each of the concepts, and then you present those, your ideas to us. And the council as a whole, you're all asked and expected to comment, and feel free to say whatever your thoughts are about it. And then we take all that back to the drawing board and incorporate it, and then move forward according to suggestions and modifications that are given to us. And how they finally come out, it's still a little bit like sausage. You see everything that goes into it. So, but how it comes out may be as, workshops in the future, depending if you think the community isn't ready. It could be, they could be program announcements, they could be summits, there could be any number of ways that these go forward. But the issue is, do you think this is a good scientific area? Do you think the community is ready? What suggestions do you have? So having said that, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Dr. Nara Gavini, who is the chief of our Office of Extramural Programs. And so he will lead the discussion of the concepts this afternoon. So Nara, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Grady. There are 7 concepts to be discussed during this 1 hour. Each concept is assigned to 1 council member, and the council member summarizes the concept, then comment on its importance to NACNR's mission, and make any additional remarks. After the remarks, the floor is open for comment by all council members. So the challenge is that we have 7 concepts, less than an hour, so we got to move on within 5 to 6 minutes for each concept. Okay? So first concept is strategies to provide culturally tailored palliative and end-of-life care for seriously ill American Indian and Alaska Native individuals. This concept is assigned to Dr. Jennifer Tamil.
Before I get started, I just wanted to thank Karen and Lynn and Jerry for all their amazing work and congratulate them on their accolades. And not surprisingly, this is incredibly well done, like everything the 3 of you do. But so this was a proposal by Lynn. So basically the premise of this, as we heard about today, is that there's now a strong evidence base for palliative and end-of-life care interventions, but those have not been disseminated widely, and especially to different sort of racial and ethnic and cultural backgrounds. But this specific topic is about American Indian and Alaskan Native individuals. And the reason that they were interested in looking at this population is compared to other less well-studied populations, they have higher death rates and tend to be diagnosed with later stage of cancer. And importantly, with respect to palliative and end-of-life care, their hospice utilization is lower than, for example, white population. And some of the challenges in this population is that their traditional care practices and sort of how they perceive spirituality, culture, environment isn't taken into account when we think about how to apply palliative and end-of-life care to this population. So basically the goal is to promote research to basically clarify and learn about the uniqueness of this community with respect to providing culturally appropriate interventions for American Indian, Alaskan Native individuals, families, and communities. So generally, I thought this was a very interesting proposal. I think that what we learned about today is that the evidence base for palliative and end-of-life care is increasing, but I think as many of our speakers today stated, I don't know that we're quite there yet. There's still a lot of work to be done. I think before we necessarily are completely ready to think about adapting some of these interventions to sort of less well-studied populations. For full disclosure, I am not a disparities researcher, so I had to learn about this. But I also just wondered, there are a lot of different racial and ethnic and cultural groups in the United States that all generally have lower quality care than Caucasian populations. And I wondered, because this is such a small population, whether limiting it to such a tiny population as opposed to being more broad about racially, ethnically, geographically diverse populations maybe would sort of lead to more research. Because as Nick pointed out, with very few palliative and end-of-life care researchers and very few researchers studying American and Native Indians, I worried that we, for example, wouldn't get any applications for this because we're just not going to have qualified people. So those were my thoughts.
Thank you, Dr. Tamel. So now this is open for comments from all the council members.
So, Jennifer, I sort of agree with your point. I think this is a very interested population, but could this be broader to include other, minority groups that we don't? We're such a diverse country. Why is it just this group when other people are at risk? Just that thought.
Can I say something on this? I believe with a lot of the studies involving this population, you have to get approval at tribal level. So the approval process to do the work is very unique with this population. And so, and I also think sometimes we do research where we just compare populations and we lose the essence and depth of understanding because in the disparities, we're comparing one group to another. So given we don't know a lot here, we might still, if we want to look at this population, do it in a narrower way. That's the downside to it. I mean, it's going to be difficult to get the population and then to get the approval, though, and you're absolutely correct on that, because it's a longer process.
Next comment is there. Yeah.
I wonder if you might think of expanding it to rural or remote populations that would be a larger group that it would be applicable to.
Okay. Thanks. Yes.
I have a couple of comments I'd like to make also. I think at the beginning when we talked about encouraging research to where it would improve and increase, I really believe that cultural adaptation is important. Cultural adaptation rather than in improving and increasing, the use of cultural adaptation. And the second is the engagement with the community, with the different tribes. I think that would make a very different way in which you would have this in terms of the collaboration and having it much broader within that particular community for dissemination and adaptation within the tribes.
Well, I understand the challenges of focusing on such a small population. I'll take a contrarian perspective and say that part of why we should do this is because the disparities on this population are so immense. And to open it up broadly might preclude the group that we're seeking to help. At the same time, I will say that although there are some challenges of working in some of these tribal locations, hospitals are encountering that. At our hospitals, we have some board members who are on the tribes and others, so it can be overcome. And I don't think it's as difficult as it appears at times. So I advocate keeping it narrow and doing the hard work to have this group studied.
Okay, let's move. Thank you all. Let's move on to the next one. The next concept is limited competition. Modular Budget Research Project Grant for NIH Nurse Scientist Scholars. And this concept is assigned to Dr. Shirley Moore.
So this is about a new mechanism, a new funding mechanism, one aimed at early career people who NINR has already invested in terms of a K award. And the idea is that it'll, within 3 years of completing their K, they would apply for this a modular budget, small R01 in other words, that will provide the opportunity for these people to get started. It would not apply to the K99 ROO group, but to other ones. The idea is that they would, that NINR then would kind of leverage some of the return on their investment of having started the careers of this group of people, as well as, in essentially targeting what I think we all agree the need to be able to help early career scientists get started. It is, the people who would be eligible, as I said, with those with a K award, other than the 99, who have a bachelor's degree or higher in nursing and have earned a research doctoral degree, as well as have received the Mentor Development Award, the K. The couple concerns that I have about this, I really support a new mechanism for early people. All right. I was just, as someone who's, feet are on the ground trying to mentor young people, I was unsure how I would mentor someone to write a regular K, then thinking they're going to do this afterwards versus writing a 99, an OO. I just wasn't sure about that path of why one over another, or if it's a different type of research, or it just, again, it would be, those of us who mentor people, I think those are important things that we want to do. I think the other concern I had about it, although I love the idea of a new mechanism, I want to say that. The concern I have about it is that you have lots of really early career people, a few get Ks, all right, assuming there's a limited number going to be funded, and then even fewer get these. So I was worried about the quality of the science at that point and the uniqueness and cool ideas that might go. Then if this early career award, this modular R01, was open to all early career people, where you could just have a wider range of people applying. That mitigates against the idea of leveraging your investment, but so that there's a difference there, I think, in what the plan was. So those were my couple concerns on it, but I thought the basic idea, we don't have many small and R21 is for exploratory stuff, and then you jump to the big R01s competing, and we haven't been clear, I think, just, we review them separately, but I'm never sure exactly if there's a formula to decide exactly how many early careers are going to get funded in our current system and that. And this way, I think, might be a little more transparent in terms of people going, going for that. Versus other ways to support, like Heart, Lung, and Blood, who gives the 5% automatic, reducing their percentile scores. So those were my thoughts.
Okay, thank you. So open for comments.
So we all struggle with getting people from K to the R01 level. I mean, that's sort of universal with the 3-year Ks. And so I see the need for something, but I wonder why we don't just downplay the K23 and K01 and move everybody into KN99, and then we wouldn't need this. This is an interesting concept, but I think that it may be that we should just do more K99 ROOs. I mean, I totally agree with Shirley's point about what would you direct people.
So I just love this concept. I'm just going record saying I do love it, and I appreciate the comments too about the the funneling down, and I think the K99 R00 has been an interesting mechanism. it isn't, it has it has some uniquenesses too with it. And so this is another opportunity. I don't think it diminishes anybody's opportunity to do the K99R00. I think it does offer an opportunity for us to really build on the folks who the Institute has supported through the K, and also sends some of that message that your first R01 is not a 10 multi-site study with 10,000 sample size, which which we also struggle with, and I think is harmful to our early investigators trying to get those R's. So it seems like a good fit. I like the idea of this a lot, and I think it would be quite popular.
Any other comments? Okay, we're moving on to the next one. So the next one is addressing caregiver symptoms through technological tools. And this is assigned to Dr. Catherine Bowles.
Thank you. So this concept is formed to, the rationale for this is that informal caregivers represent an important resource in our country for providing unpaid care, and so their value is really important to America and to total Medicaid spending. And these caregivers are at risk for the development of symptoms. They're often unprepared for their role. They receive inadequate or no training, and they experience emotional, mental, physical health problems due to their caregiving challenges. This concept supports the NACNR strategic plan areas of technology and symptom science, but I also think it could support the health promotion portfolio as well. The way it is written, it sounds like we wait until they have symptoms and then intervene to monitor them. It's about using technologies such as assistive medical devices, remote communication and monitoring tools, sensors, mobile technologies and alert systems, and also machine learning to enhance our understanding of their symptoms and changing needs. So again, it sounds like we wait until they are producing symptoms and they're sick versus more of a let's learn what their stressors are, their needs are. So I was suggesting some words maybe like within objective number 1, which is to identify, test, and evaluate technologies aimed at symptom recognition and assessment in caregivers. I inserted the word "and needs assessment" in caregivers. So again, to get that understanding of what their needs are and what might be leading to symptom and other distress. And also recommend inserting some words about prevention that prevent and reduce caregiver symptoms. I think that decision-making is a real stressor for caregivers, and so somewhere within here, using technology to support decision-making to, again, prevent the stress of making the types of decisions that they do, and providing knowledge and training, that kind of thing, through technology would be a way of broadening this a bit. Other symptoms that were not mentioned that I think are a possibility to pay attention to is denial. So the caregiver that can't accept the end of life is coming, the need to change, the dynamics of multiple caregivers, the interplay of family caregivers, and the strains that I see lots of heads nodding in here, the strains that they go under were some of my other suggestions. And also considering communication as well.
Thank you. It's open for comments.
At the bottom of the rationale, where it's saying they experience emotional, mental, and physical health problems, but I also think there are some social problems as well that you can consider. And again, I really think decision-making is a huge strain on these people from start to finish.
Yeah,
It does seem like a nice synergy between the palliative care and the technology support, and how do you leverage that in a meaningful way? So I like the concept of, and see that there's value moving forward with it. I definitely agree with the decision support and having sort of a backup person to help you work through a decision.
Thank you. Okay, we are moving on to the next one. Next concept is symptom signs, biobehavioral underpinnings of chronic pain. And this is assigned to Dr. Nancy Radiker.
So, this looks at and sort of comes out of the opioid crisis and the need to treat chronic pain, and focuses on individual phenotypes, genotypes, and other omic type assessments to look at mechanistic understanding of chronic pain and the effect of intervention. I really like this, and I think it's really important. The funny thing is, I had just read this book about the history of the opioid crisis at the time I reviewed this, so it really resonated with me. But I would really like to see this. So the objectives are to optimize approaches for combining phenotypic, omic, and behavioral measures to integrate data from multiple sources, and look at interventions as well as frameworks. I like this. I would like to see it a little broader. So it talks about integrating biology and behavior, but I would like us to think about geography, culture, socioeconomic status. It's not really just biology and behavior if we really are serious about precision health. And I also think it could be a little bit more explicit when this ultimately comes out. One of the objectives talks about childhood pain, but I think we need to be really clear if we mean that this is across the lifespan, that needs to be stated. As a former critical care nurse, it dawns on me, and after I read that book about the opioid crisis, sometimes chronic pain arises from an acute care experience. So it focuses on chronic pain, but this idea, and I use this in my work, the trajectory of the illness experience. Because I think that chronic pain is intimately tied to that. I mean, sometimes you had an orthopedic injury or some acute thing that led to the chronic pain. And so sort of looking at this problem across those stages, I think, would be helpful. I also think the last objective here is about examining biobehavioral interventions. Again, it should be a little bit broader, but the outcome here is functional constraints. But do we all, I mean, functional straits is important, but do we mean other kinds of broader outcomes as well? Are we interested in other symptoms? Are we interested in quality of life or healthcare resource utilization or addiction? I mean, there's many other outcomes that could be considered, so I'd like to see that a little bit broader. I'll stop there.
So I was wondering, although the objectives as written don't preclude using existing data, but with all of the existing data that's out there that could be tapped into, that would be from an omics point of view, from a phenotype point of view, trying to develop these algorithms and things of this nature, maybe an objective that also highly encouraged that sort of reuse of data that's already out there, not necessarily always having to start from scratch, recruiting and phenotyping and collecting omics data, but one that also encourages use of existing resources might fit nicely with this as well.
Nancy, I actually, in responding and looking at my concept, which is next, it's very related to yours. So then I looked at what I wrote, and some of it really applies to yours. And I'm going back to the biologic. But when you're looking at genotype, you could also, because we're so concerned about the opioids, we should consider the endogenous opioid functioning, sex hormones, and gender roles, if they're going in that type of way, because I think that those also will influence the expression of pain, particularly in certain groups.
The other thing I forgot to mention is the other symptoms, things like depression, anxiety.
Okay, thank you so much. So let's move on to the next one, that is self-management of chronic pain, biopsychosocial approach. This is assigned to Dr. Deborah Konya-Griffin.
So this is very related to what you just heard, and the rationale for this particular concept is that since chronic pain is influenced by psychological and social factors, such as distress, trauma, fear, we can go on, one's social support, acceptance, self-efficacy, a comprehensive biopsychosocial approach is needed. And this approach needs to address considerable disparities in pain. I like it because it looks at some of the social determinants of health that I think we often lose sight of. So that's in it. And it also will addresses biases and disparities that may influence not only the identification of pain, it also influences therapy and outcomes, contributing to the undertreatment of racial minorities and children and other groups who are at risk. And a number of groups are identified in the concept, such as veterans, people with low English proficiency, low literacy, and low SES, and also setting. I'd like to add to this for consideration people living with different types of disabilities, which I think is a very neglected population. And when we think of risk, we should think of it in terms of environment. We talked about rural, but people in different settings may have different pain experiences and self-manage them differently. And that could be children in school settings, it could be people in occupational settings, so we can broaden that thinking. Nursing homes we've talked about, but they'll all be very different settings. I think it's important for us to, and I believe that, Kathy, you mentioned looking at the decision-making processes, but we need to look at it in self-management and use technology to develop decision-making tools for personalized selection of what to do. And I think that first is it's a two-phase type of project, but we could start with the assessment, and then if we had mobile phones that had this type of support that for selection and decision-making, it would be very helpful. We also, another area we haven't considered is reimbursement models. If we're going towards non-pharmaceutical approaches for self-management, we need to look at reimbursement models, develop them that will support non-pharmaceutical treatment modalities. And this is recommended by the National Academy of Sciences. I don't get credit for that one, but I looked at the report that was cited. In terms of investigating interventions involving complementary and alternative medicine, we have lots of them out there, but there's sometimes very little research, and some areas very mixed findings. So things like CBT, culturally adapted CBT versus regular CBT, mindfulness meditation, acupuncture, and electrical stimulations. If you start looking at the research, sometimes it's very scarce, and sometimes you can't make any conclusion based on all the mixed findings. So I'll stop there since I've been talking a bit.
Okay, comments?
Is there any possibility of combining this one and the previous one, or does that make it too broad? I mean, I'm certainly not an expert, but we in the research community read these things very literally. And sometimes a little broader is better.
I agree with you totally, because as you were speaking, I'm saying they belong together.
Thanks for the suggestions. So, thank you. Any other comments? Okay, thank you. So the next one is telomere health in wellness and disease, a biobehavioral approach. This is assigned to Dr. Yvette Connolly.
Okay, so this concept focuses on using telomeres as biomarkers in encouraging inclusion of those types of biomarkers into our research. And just a little bit about telomeres. So those are the caps on the ends of chromosomes, contain repetitive DNA. You can afford to lose some of that DNA before you start to have consequences. And it's normal in a dividing cell to have chromosomes get shorter and your telomeres get shorter. And that's actually an important clue to the cell to go into senescence or apoptosis. But we also know that the reduction of telomeres can be accelerated. And some of the things that accelerate shortening of telomeres would be things like smoking. Nutrition's been associated with shortening of telomeres. Exercise has been shown to keep telomeres longer. Stress, neighborhood. Zip code has been shown to impact telomere length. Diversity or adversity has been shown to impact telomere length. Sex, there's evidence out there that says that there's variation by sex. There's variation, and certainly the two areas that have been focused on the most with telomeres in the past have been aging and cancer. So what appealed to me about this concept was, one, there's a focus on wellness in addition to disease or being unhealthy. So I felt like this fit very nicely with NINR's strategic plan for wellness, symptom science, self-management. I could see it fitting into all of these areas. And the other thing that appealed to me was when you look at the telomere literature, there really is nothing about symptoms. And it seems to me like, the institute that should probably move that forward would be NINR. So I was excited about that because I feel like the time is ripe to be incorporating telomeres into our research. Why haven't we done it before? Some of it might have been because measuring telomere length has been an issue in the past. Right now, it's gotten a little bit easier. It's certainly gotten a little bit more reliable. And so I think like the time is right to be thinking about incorporating this into the type of science that we're all trying to do. So some of the objectives that were put forth were, for example, looking at behavioral, lifestyle, psychosocial, and environmental factors that either positively or negatively impact telomeres. And also looking at the association of telomeres with health outcomes, and looking at it, telomeres could also be used to look at, to monitor intervention responses over time in a longitudinal intervention study. And these interventions do not need to be pharmacologic. One of the appealing pieces would be that lifestyle modification or non-pharmacologic type interventions have been shown to have an impact on telomeres. So the connection between wellness, health, and and some of the epidemiologic evidence that's out there could absolutely be telomeres. And the timing, I believe, is ripe to start incorporating those biomarkers into the type of research that NINR is interested in funding. So one of the pieces of the objectives that I would absolutely agree with as well is that telomeres should be considered within the context of other biological markers. So we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We've started to generate a lot of important data on biomarkers and bringing together the bio and the behavioral for a lot of the science. And we wouldn't want to throw out those other markers that have been very important. We would want to bring telomeres into the fold, I believe. A couple of comments that I would have. So telomere health was used in the title as well as throughout the concept. I'm not sure that I would have it, put out there that way because I'm not 100% sure how you would define telomere health. It could be very contextual. So I'm not sure that telomere health might be the ultimate way that we would want to put it out there for the public. The other thing is that wasn't in the objectives that I would advocate for is the really a lot of the interesting stuff that's going on with telomeres right now is around regulation of telomeres. So yes, all of these things that we talked about could impact telomere length, but we also know that there are molecular and cellular things that are impacting how long our telomeres are that we don't necessarily have control over. So I feel like if I would advocate that piece could potentially be part of an objective, that if someone was capable or able to incorporate that regulatory piece, that molecular or cellular regulatory piece into their research, that would be encouraged because I feel like that would help us tell more chapters of the telomere story. And I think when we would get into trouble would be on the replication piece. And if we don't account for some of that telomere regulation that could be going on, that we could measure and account for and control for, we might have trouble replicating some of these findings. So I would think that those pieces could be encouraged within the context of the concept as well.
Thank you. So it's open for comments. Yeah.
I have a question. I would think this concept is an important one, and it's really interesting and would be exciting. But I have a question about it. How responsive are the telomeres to interventions? Like, how long does it take to see an increase or a decrease in them?
So I actually think that that's an important question. That probably still needs to be answered, right? So I think that that could be part of the research that needs to be done. So a lot of the interventions that have been done, that have been looked at from the point of view of telomeres, have sort of been tacked on and not done in the kind of prospective way that we would hope if we were going to incorporate this into, bring it into the clinic at some point. But they are dynamic. They do change over time in response. People have looked at 6-month exercise programs and they've seen changes. But again, I think for a lot of the lifestyle pieces that we might be interested in, or some of the interventions that we might be looking at using telomeres as a check along the way, I think that research probably actually needs to be done.
Do you think that objective 1 would lend itself perhaps to the use of some of the new data banks that are being developed that are collecting various, psychological, behavioral data along with biological samples, that might be a good way for some of those data to be used?
I think that's a good point. And I also think when you start to think about research that's ongoing, would this be something that people could be encouraged to add to what they're already doing? In addition to your comment about, other research that's going on or already done.
Okay. Any other comments?
I just have one quick question, since no one else is jumping in. I'll take advantage. So just from your perspective and what you know of the field, do you imagine a robust response to this, or is this going to be relegated to just a handful of individuals to respond, or are we going to get some interdisciplinary stuff? What do you think?
I don't know. So I think the individual variability in response to, like, say, a particular non-pharma intervention, I think that there would be great individual variability, but that individual variability could actually be an important thing to characterize as well. But I think that these are all unanswered.
Okay, let's move on to the final concept. That is end of life and palliative care approaches to advanced signs and symptoms. And this concept is assigned to Dr. Jennifer Hatzfeld.
All right, thank you. So this is really timely because it ties to our conversation earlier about palliative care and symptom management and symptom science. So Karen, I want to borrow your crystal ball if you don't mind. The concept is to look at the multidimensional foundations, expressions, and management of complex advanced signs and symptoms at the end of life. There's not a lot of research there about the unique physical, emotional, and social changes that affect how late-stage symptoms are experienced and managed, and probably manifested as well. And so some of the examples of what that might include are things like pain, fatigue, nausea, dyspnea, confusion, delirium, constipation, depressed mood, and sleep. I think those show the great range of different symptoms within the palliative care system that would be helpful. And really the intent is to improve individuals' quality of life, to optimize the appropriate pharmacologic and non-pharmacologic interventions, to improve the ability to focus on what's important and reduce caregiver burden. So I think it really has an important focus area that's very holistic on this population. In terms of the importance, I would say, yes, this is really relevant to nursing and to NINR. I think that synergy between symptom management and palliative care is really important to capture. I think our conversation earlier about how to perhaps tie together the symptom scientists and the palliative care folks together, that this might be a great encouragement to make that happen. That said, this is super messy. There are a lot of confounders to think about that aren't really captured in this. The first one that comes to mind is age in terms of the geriatric population. So we already know there are some changes with age, and then how does that work then with end-of-life care, and what does that look like in a younger population? There are genomic differences in terms of the precision medicine and what we're learning on that, in terms of pharmacologic interventions and other things. Then the whole discussion about medical complexity. And how does that then interact with all of these symptom management or symptoms and the way they're expressed and managed appropriately or inappropriately, and not to mention the interaction between the symptoms themselves and how we manage those. So my concern is that it's a wonderful topic. My concern is that if we put it out there and people apply for it, there are so many confounders, it may not score well scientifically during the scientific review, and I'm not sure the best way to do that. It's something that would need to be wrestled with, but that would be sort of my primary concern on that level. And that's all I had. Thanks.
Thank you. Any comments?
I would just suggest adding thinking about a couple other symptoms, which are incontinence, anorexia, and weight loss.
Just that, Jennifer, do you have any suggestions for fixing it or improving it so it's not so messy as you describe?
Dr. Rediker might be a better one to answer that. Perhaps it could be or include the exploratory nature of it, so it's not so much looking at definitive correlations at that level, but perhaps just a little bit more exploratory. What are the experiences of the patients, and describing it more at that level initially? That might help with that.
Well, rereading this, I think the objectives are pretty, I mean, the first one is to explore. I mean, it is a messy business, but it needs to happen. So, I mean, it feels like a program announcement where we wouldn't just be jumping to clinical trial, but it really would be something that would lend itself to true exploration, right? Description, correlation, even some perhaps mixed methods. You know, it's not going to be, I don't think, terribly mechanistic at this point till we figure out what this even looks like, and then move to mechanism and intervention. So I think if it's written that way, you give people some latitude, because you're right. I mean, it is the complexity of all the chronic conditions and the patient, it's going to be messy. I agree. But it has to be done. And some of these symptoms haven't been looked at all. I mean, we look at pain, and my familiarities with pain and depression, mood stuff, I don't think anybody's looked at sleep, you know, so some of the symptoms really haven't been addressed hardly at all.
That's an interesting observation. What you're really describing in another way of looking at it, I think, is that this, because it's early on, is going to be similar to many of the early studies that we funded in the area of end of life when there was almost nothing that had been done. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And those studies tended to be more qualitative, and they also tended to be more interdisciplinary. That's an interesting framework, thanks.
Really rich to do something that was mixed methods, where you collected maybe some self-report and interview and even biological data.
Well, and would it lend itself to like computational analyses or things where you really can look at the sort of the complex picture of all this different type of data that I think it's going to need to answer the question?
Medical record data, for example, large, big data. I mean, so I think it should be broadly.
That's really interesting. Does that help, Jennifer?
I think it does. I wonder also in terms of like symptom clusters, if that's something else to consider about not just individual symptoms, but how they all work together.
And I was thinking even encouraging use of some new visualization techniques and exploring relationships among them.
But if I may, I think it may be that all this discussion maybe speaks against the management objective, not there yet, right? Right? Am I hearing that?
Too, I mean, that you're looking at, and then there's word strategies throughout that.
Yeah, I agree. I think removing the word management will help make it more specific to exploratory nature.
Objective is clear in that area, but we need to just.
I don't know, I feel like I don't want to remove management. I think there are some populations, I know I brag that we're, cancer, I'm sorry for you cardiology people, but I do think in oncology, we are ready to start intervening on some of these symptoms. So maybe we can leave it in there, but I don't know how to say that, but I think for some of these symptoms in cancer, we're ready to intervene. Yeah.
Also, I don't know if there's been that much work on looking at management of symptom clusters as opposed to individual symptoms.
Thanks for the great comments and thanks for your help. Back to you, Dr. Grady.
Thank you so much, and thank you, everybody. This was a great discussion, and we really appreciate all the help and guidance. So now we're going to turn the mic over to Dr. Kearney, who will guide us through the next piece of work that we have to do today.
Very briefly. At this time of year, we review the Statement of Understanding. And the Statement of Understanding really outlines the agreement between the NACNR and you as our advisory council. So we do review this once a year to see if there's any changes needed. The statement was made available to you in the electronic council book, and a copy is also available in your Day 1 PDF. At a high level, the Statement of Understanding outlines your responsibilities regarding the second-level review of all our grant applications, resolving any special considerations that there may be, such as high-budget human subjects concerns. So really no substantive changes have been made to the Statement of Understanding, except there was an addition of a statement clarifying the exclusion of RFAs and SBIR and STTRs from the high-budget 350K criteria, noting that we would bring human subjects and welfare concerns for discussion only and not the budget because it's not covered in that. So maybe you need to review the Statement of Understanding, or if you have not, if you have reviewed it, are there any questions? If you want to have any questions, I'd be happy to answer questions tomorrow if you want to review it. Yes.
Just, there was an email that we received, something about changes in terms of human subjects review for the future. Is that affected by this, or is it too early, or I don't know?
We'll actually talk about that tomorrow when we go through the applications. What it means is that the codes have been, basically what it is, the summary of that is that the codes have been changed so that it's not it's 48 now, is that right? It's 48. Yeah, so it's a 48 now, and instead of a 44. And basically what it means is that we are now requiring IRB approval before the awards are made, and that so that any issues that you have or any concerns will be sent to the investigator for the IRB. So, we'll still go through them and we'll listen to your concerns, but we won't have you voting as to whether it's okay or not. We'll convey your concerns because your decision-making, or your recommendations rather, will not put a bar on or anything like that. So that essentially it's meant squarely where it really should be, which is in the IRB. And because we are going to have single IRBs now, I think it'll be easier to do that. Okay, so we're coming to the end of the day, and once again, congratulations for doing your homework, because the discussions have been really good and very prioritized and pointed. So we are just about to finish for today. I will adjourn and say that we are adjourned for the day, and we'll meet back here at 9 a.m. tomorrow, and we'll see all of the council members at the restaurant this evening so that we can properly send off the retirees who came back just to be roasted.